Welcome to another installment of our 2020 Virtual Global and Community Engagement Conference, formerly known as D80. The conference is a dialogue and celebration of our efforts to solve issues that confront the world's poorest 80%. Traditionally, it's a one-day conference featuring multiple in-person panels, a breakout session, and this year, the conference is being delivered virtually throughout the month of October, including a lecture series, a rosé gallery exhibit, a walking tour, and a series of online interviews with local and global changemakers throughout the Michigan Tech community. My name is Darnisha Slade, and I am a member of the Conference Planning Committee. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Mr. David Shull. I'm going to read his bio really quick. David Shull joined Handshake in 2014 as one of the founding team members. Since then, he has gone on to lead Handshake's university growth in the United States from 5 universities in 2004 to over 1,000 universities, 17 million students, and 500,000 global employers in 2020. Today, David is leading Handshake's international expansion efforts in the United Kingdom and Europe. With a degree in computer science from Michigan Tech, of course, David is passionate about the intersection of technology and education and believes together we can be a powerful engine for social mobility. He is also an external advisory board member for the Pavlis Honors College, as well as a graduate of our Global Leadership Program. David, thanks for having me with us today. How are you?
Doing well. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me to the conversation.
Good. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us in a completely different time zone. So,
of course,
I'll just
the miracles of Zoom.
What's that? Oh.
The miracles of Zoom, right?
I know, right?
We can do this globally now.
I get zoomed out though. It's just a lot of Zooming. So I'll get right into the questions if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
All right. So tell me a little bit about your organization for those that may not be familiar with Handshake.
Yeah, so Handshake you can think of as a kind of early career network that facilitates connections between students at universities across the US and the United Kingdom and their kind of next opportunity. So it could be transitioning from university career, could be finding an internship, a placement, part-time work. We created the organization with a mission to democratize opportunity and to help reduce a lot of the inequalities that existed in access to opportunities, access to social capital, and access to a lot of those kind of credentials. So company came from Michigan Tech. So the founding team, Garrett, Ben, Scott, were all Michigan Tech graduates as well. And I was able to kind of connect with them through actually enterprise at Michigan Tech. And
very nice.
We really recognized that there was an opportunity for technology to make an impact here. So we partner with university career centers as their kind of back office solution and facilitate connections to a now global network of employers and other students. And that's kind of Handshake in a nutshell.
Very nice. I'd like to hear a little bit of, what were you thinking in 2014? Did it just kind of start snowballing, or was that all part of the vision that you all had for the organization?
No, I mean, I think it really came out of a lot of the experiences that the early team had in trying to navigate this process. As I'm sure most of the viewers know, Michigan Tech is a magical place. It's also a little challenging for companies to get to, particularly those in like California.
Right.
So I arrived on campus. I studied computer engineering, computer science. My dream was to go work at Apple, and realized that was going to be a little bit more challenging than I thought. And it was those types of experiences and conversations with our professors, with the Career Center, that really started to open our eyes to the fact that some of the smartest people that I've met to this date were my peers at Michigan Tech, but they didn't always know how to navigate to the opportunities that they were interested in. And so we started to think about ways that we could partner with the university to actually help bridge the gap between some of these incredibly talented individuals and the opportunities that they were passionate about. And so that's where Handshake came from. And we started building in 2014. And I think our ambitions continued to grow, but I think our understanding of the problem also started to grow, right? Like a lot of the founding team, we were, from actually incredibly privileged backgrounds as white males attending an engineering college in Michigan. Like, I don't think we even fully appreciated how much harder a lot of students around the world and around the country and around the world had it. And so it's been, I think, really rewarding to see that as the company's grown, our understanding of the problem has grown, but also the impact that we've been able to have. So we're really proud of the partnerships that we have with HBCUs across the country, around historically Hispanic institutions, around universities in the UK that focus on widening participation, and being able to help all students have a meaningful career has been something that's been really special for us. So that's a little bit of where it got started, and I think a little bit of kind of where we're at today.
Very nice. And just for the record, HBCUs is historically Black colleges and universities, correct?
Yes, that's right. Sorry, I'm so used to the acronyms.
I know it's all acronyms. Exactly. That's Michigan Tech's fault. We are an acronym university, so
yeah, exactly. But get it ingrained early, right?
Exactly. So I do want to hear before I move on to the next question. What do you believe? That early team. What do you believe that Michigan Tech gave you that's contributing or has contributed to your success as an organization?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's something we think a lot about. When we moved from Michigan Tech basically to Silicon Valley, we kind of did the startup scene of working out of a house in Palo Alto before now. We've got a quite an expansive office in the financial district of San Francisco. And so it's been quite a journey to get there. But as we've talked with a lot of other startups, I think that, there's easy. I attended a conference in Silicon Valley, and it was quite interesting. They asked a bunch of kind of startup founders and early employees a survey, and like, how many hours of TV do you think the average American watches? How many minutes of exercise do you think they get? And pretty consistently, they would say that the average American, this kind of group of like Silicon Valley technologists would say like the average American watches an hour of TV a day, and the actual number is something like 5 or 6 hours. And I think there's question after question like that, and it kind of demonstrated how in some of these microcosms you can be quite out of touch with like the challenges that people are facing outside of the Silicon Valley ecosystem, for example. And so why that can be a great incubator for some technologies coming out of institutions like Stanford. I think the tenacity and the experiences that we had at Michigan Tech, braving incredibly cold winters, driving through the snow to get to campus, having I remember one it's kind of amazing, right? How many companies, like Michigan Tech has one of the largest career fairs in the country. And it's amazing that the companies will come in the middle of the winter to recruit students there, right?
Right.
It's like absolutely amazing. But like, I remember one of our career fairs was like, it was canceled because it was a blizzard, right? And it was, I think those experiences combined with the community, the fact that, all of the founding team were like quite involved in different areas of campus, that created, I think, the unique environment that enabled us to not only understand the problem, but to be willing to kind of run towards it and to make an impact on that. And so a lot of that's like hindsight, right? Processing that and trying to think about how this all came together. At the time, it just felt like the thing to do.
Right.
But I do think a lot about that, like would it have happened anywhere else? And I'm not sure that it would have. So
great, thanks. So tell me how your work or Handshake as an organization connect with the mission of the Global Community Engagement Conference, which is a dialogue and celebration of our efforts to solve issues that confront the world's poorest 80%, and or this year's theme, which is the pursuit of social equity and representation.
Yeah, I think it's a mission that's close to our heart. We think about Handshake's mission as a company is to democratize opportunity, and we've initially started doing that by partnering with universities. And I think when you look at the university landscape, you already have huge variance in the access to opportunities that students have from a job perspective, but also just the resources that students have when they go to university. A lot of the institutions we work with, like it's not a given that students have laptops or even smartphones that they can use to connect with these types of technologies. And so what can happen is that it can create and reinforce this kind of cycle of, you go to university and you expect that's going to be an engine for social mobility, but it's not always the case, right? Outcomes are variant in a pretty massive way. And so what we've tried to do with Handshake is address what we think of as like the three pillars of inequality in the university space, or the challenges, which are: one, access to opportunity. So before Handshake, there was an enormous level of inequality in how many just jobs, internships you knew about, right? If you logged into the university system, you may have 100 opportunities at one university and 1,000 at another. Right. And so the Handshake network really tries to address that and make it easy for companies to recruit more broadly and to recruit at institutions that they may not have known about or thought about, to help make sure that there's that education piece. Because we know that from a student perspective, it's really hard to go seek something out if you don't know it exists, right? And so we think about that as like step one to trying to solve this. Step two is then democratizing what we think of as social capital, right? So if you give two students, one from Harvard and one from, I don't know, pick a small rural university, access to the same jobs, right? Like, it's still not a level playing field, right? The access to social capital is hugely different. And so we think about, how do you actually help provide, coaching almost through technology to help facilitate the development of social capital. And so we're in the early stages of working with universities to figure out how technology in combination with the university efforts can actually make an impact there. And so that includes things like, nudges and making it easy for students to send messages. Like, we know in other systems, of a student that is, trying to send their first professional networking message, if they're presented with a blank text box, they might not know where to put that text box, right? They might not know, like, what's the format? Is this like a texting format? Should it be more of a formal email? And like, the waves of self-doubt that can trigger oftentimes make it so students just disengage altogether. Yeah. And so we try to think about, like,
intimidating for them.
Exactly. And so we think a lot about, like, how can technology help nudge people in the right direction and remove some of those elements. We're seeing a huge shift happening because of COVID, in that this shift to virtual recruitment has been accelerated probably 5 to 10 years, to the point where now companies are actually recruiting and attending fairs they may never have done before, even in an economic contraction. So you're starting to see these shifting behaviors that Handshake's able to facilitate really make an impact. And then I think as we look aspirationally, like, we recognize that there's a need to democratize the credential. And that's where I think you start to look at, if you're attending an institution or a university, right, there's already a certain amount of privilege there. Now that varies massively, but we're starting to think through, like, how can Handshake be an engine for social mobility for students that maybe are taking non-traditional paths? They're going to boot camps, they're going to community college, they're going to
school.
Exactly. Like, how do we help facilitate awareness of opportunities, social capital development and credentials for them in a meaningful way that connects them to opportunities? And so that's where I think we're starting to invest in our kind of the early stages. But we think that collectively those initiatives will make an impact in helping everybody kind of get access to opportunities and develop. It's going to help companies build their best, most diverse teams ever. We think that by removing a lot of these barriers to recruitment, it makes a huge impact for everybody. So I think that's how we kind of think about this connecting to the mission, particularly of the social equality element, but also we think that those elements will help enhance the role of universities as engines of social mobility in our economy and our ecosystem.
So I know that your focus is on universities at this point. What's next? Is it like a move towards maybe nonprofit organizations, or like you talked about, maybe vocational schools, places like that? What do you think is a logical next step as far as outreach is concerned?
Yeah. So this year we're doing a lot to kind of build partnerships with community colleges around the country. And so we've actually established even some statewide partnerships there that have really proven to be quite effective. And we're working with companies to start to rethink, and this is very early days, but one of the things that we recognize is most companies you talk to recognize that, like, GPA is not an effective indicator of success, right? And it's something that the Pavlis Honors College, for example, holds kind of near to their heart, which is like, it's not a great indicator. Major or course, as we call it here in the UK, like that's not a great indicator of what job you're able to do. So they kind of recognize that these existing metrics are pretty broken, but it's also the best they have to make judgments on talent. And so we're starting to think about like, what's the role of a network like Handshake and being able to create more equitable qualifications and credentials. And I think when you combine that with things like community colleges, you combine that with things like boot camps that have different funding models, it starts to open up opportunities to break down some of these like deeply ingrained behaviors that companies have, to make it so that some of these kind of vanity metrics, I'll say, go away and are replaced with like, is this actually the right person for the role based on their experiences, based on their skill sets, based on kind of their, what they're looking for and so on. So I think that's a little bit of what we're trying to do, and we're starting to branch out. We've also created what's called Handshake Open, which lets any student access the Handshake network. It used to be that you had to go to a university that partnered with Handshake, which we, and there's still massive benefits, right? Like university partnerships are still one of the top priorities of the company, and we're adding community colleges and some of these other routes. But we recognize that it was hard to stand by our mission in democratizing opportunity and say like, we're democratizing opportunity if your university can afford a career management system. Like that's like actually not probably democratizing opportunity very much, right? So so that opening up of access has been, I think, pretty transformational in the impact that we're able to have across the country. And now that we're expanding across the UK and Europe, I think won't be long before it's a global impact.
Very cool. So tell me how this experience has personally impacted you and potentially the communities that you serve.
Yeah, I think that from a personal perspective, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that it has totally changed my life. I originally envisioned myself being like a computer scientist or a computer engineer, like I said, working for Apple, and that would have been one path. But I think what I've really found is like a love for working with people, working with organizations, and actually like seeing an impact in a very quick turnaround. The impact that we're having at the organizational level, I think, is pretty, there's just so many incredible stories that you see coming out of this. Like there's one student that I believe went to Delaware State University, grew up, went to university there, never left the state of Delaware, logged into Handshake, and they built out a profile and started getting the message indicated that they were interested in working in finance. A company in Los Angeles found the student's profile and actually like reached out to them and immediately invited them to come fly out to Los Angeles for an interview. And it was the first plane ride the student's ever been on, and ended up getting some amazing internships and opportunities through Handshake that never would have happened before, right? That company wouldn't have known to like seek out Delaware State and create a separate username, a separate password, and a separate job posting, and like hope that the right student applied. But by breaking that down and not only making it easy for them to connect, but to message and reach out to students who may have otherwise like self-selected out of that opportunity, changes everything, right? There's so much psychology that goes into this, and our numbers show that this is happening thousands and thousands and thousands of times across the country. And like employers are now reaching out to students, and I think that's what I get really excited about, is the model of Handshake is such that every day I talk to universities and they say like, I don't understand, like there's these incredibly talented students, they could do anything that they want, but they look at a company like that they like aspire to, Google or one of these like very fancy brand name companies, and they say, oh, they'd never hire me, right? And you go talk to Google and they're like, we're trying to increase the representation across our company, like we are desperate to hire students with these skill sets, like we will literally pay anything we can to find them. And they told us the story of like, they had a student from a university here in the UK that won their hackathon in London 3 years in a row, but wouldn't apply to their jobs because they didn't think they went to a university that Google would hire from. And so it's just like, how do you break that narrative? And so universities have wrestled with this for decades. we think the best way to break that narrative is to allow Google to tell that story to that student. Like if Google reaches out, and this is just one example, it happens with all kinds of different companies, but like if Google reaches out and says, hey, based on your profile, based on your experiences, based on who you are, we think you could be a good fit. Would you come have a conversation with us? The emotional calculus of that student, just, it changes instantly and drastically. And it can mean a totally different career trajectory. Like we know that the first job that a student has will do more to determine their long-term socioeconomic status than almost anything else. And so that one message can make such an impact. And today employers are sending hundreds of thousands, if not millions of messages across the US version of the network right now, particularly during COVID when there's no other way to connect with opportunity and with students. So I think that the impact that Handshake's had has already been incredibly profound, but I think we're also just getting started. Like some of these things that we're working on with credentialing, with rethinking the structures that have existed around qualifying talent is going to be really, really exciting.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm very passionate about the narrative about GPAs and standardized tests and how that limits accessibility to so many people that even for a Michigan Tech, for example, just because they don't have the credentials, they have the ability to come to a place like Tech and do very well. But so
I'm trying to remember. I can picture the book in my head, but yeah, I mean, there's so much research, right, that suggests that, you know, ACT, SAT scores are like probably just as much a function of how much you can pay for test prep as they are actually like your ability to like intellectually engage at a university successfully. So I think the same is true on the output, right?
Yeah, there's a book from Paul Tuff. I think that's his name, and he has a book that relates to that. So there's a lot of research out there. To wrap up our time, what's one takeaway that you'd like others to know about Handshake, or any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think that probably the advice that I would give, just thinking back to you know, I was engaged when it was the D80 conference and thinking about these initiatives, right? I think it's easy to sit there and see some of these aspirational talks and say like, wow, like I have to have this idea of like creating a, you know, massive marketplace that connects, like, you know, solves this problem. And I think that makes it really kind of intimidating to take the first step, right? And actually start to make that impact. But nobody, like the Handshake that exists today was absolutely nowhere near what we thought it was going to be when we started working on it in 2014, right? When Garrett, Ben, and Scott started as like a side project in 2012, like they never imagined that we would be operating at this scale. And so I think that starting a project, starting to make an impact, like, is the first step. Like find the people that you respect across Michigan Tech the most and that you have good relationships with, and like just start building something, right? And that at the end of the day is what I think will start to make an impact. And when you say building something, it doesn't actually have to be a product, like it doesn't have to actually be a thing. Like it could be building a, you know, social like impacts, or building a charity, or building something, right? But if you're passionate about making an impact and you're passionate about a problem, find the best people that you know and start building something and figure out the rest as you go. Because I think that's the first step, and it's the step that most people don't take.
Yeah. Were you always this easy and casual to talk to? I mean, I'm just wondering, what was David Shull back? You probably still had a little, you know, a little vibe to you, a little swag. Did you always have swag, David?
I think if nothing else, I probably had an over amount of just like blind confidence. But I think like actually when I used to teach I TA'd for one of the Pavlos classes, and I think the metaphor
talking to one of your former students.
Oh really?
Yes, I'm drawing a blank on her name, but
was it Erin by any chance?
Who is it?
Erin Richard. She just joined. Okay.
Nope, she would beat me up if she heard this interview, because Amanda Moya.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yep. Yep.
So she was just talking about the class that you TA'd, but I'll let you finish.
No, it's okay. I remember Amanda, I was right after our class was the first time that she ever saw snow. So she came out, she's from, I think,
Yeah.
Las Vegas or something, and like walked out of class. That was the first time. So I'll never forget that. But it was, I think, in that class where it's like, I described, because it was like my last year at Michigan Tech, and I kind of was reflecting on a lot of what I had learned, and I had made so many mistakes and did so many just like dumb things, and like learning leadership and building organizations, and like, um, you know, I almost got impeached from like the U.S. the government, like the student government. Like there's just like a lot of stuff like that, right? Where it's like it felt like the world was ending at the time, but actually like university is kind of like a sandbox, right? It's like an opportunity to like try and build things and watch them get washed away by the waves and like rebuild them, and like you're learning so much. And I think that like that's where a lot of the skills that I then used at Handshake came from, right? It's just like getting involved, doing those things, learning the hard way,
Yeah.
and like realizing that at the end of the day, like it's a pretty safe environment. Like getting impeached from student government felt like the end of the world at the time, but like in hindsight, like I have like this is the first time I thought about it in years, right? But like, but it helped me understand like how like should you actually like approach like getting your ideas across, and like those types of things. So I think it's a long way to answer your question of like, no, I definitely have not always been quite like this, but I do attribute a lot of the time of both Michigan Tech and Handshake, right, and like teaching me a lot of where I'm at today. So
Very cool. Well, you got swag, man. You working it.
there we go. I think it's just the lights, to be honest. I think it's just the lights, but it's yeah.
Has nothing to do with you.
Yeah, I'll take it.
I have one last question that I think just working with a lot of students at Michigan Tech and the idea of networking. There's tons of misconceptions that they have about networking. What would you say are one or two of the biggest misconceptions that students have about the networking process?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that I totally agree. I think networking and mentoring are two of those terms I think that are super scary and alienating for a lot of people. And I think that like I like I'm not obviously a super expert in a lot of these areas, but like I think that there's people underestimate the power of like weak ties, right? So I think there's this expectation that in order to like build a network, you have to be like best friends with everybody. And that's just not the case, right? Like I think for me, what I've started to appreciate is the fact that like even if you're talking to a group of like 1,000 people, like most people will not take the time to come up to you afterwards and just introduce themselves and like say one or two things that they appreciated and then ask a good question. People way underestimate the power of a good question.
Absolutely.
And then like follow up with that person with the LinkedIn invite and say like, hey, here's what I actually like. I just watched your keynote or whatever. I really appreciated that. Because you never know when that you're going to be interested in that industry, right? And that ties into I think the second point around like mentorship, which is like once somebody like helps you, and helps doesn't have to be like super invested. It could be they accepted your LinkedIn request and they answered a question that you had at a conference. Once they've helped you, there's this like natural tendency to feel invested and to want to keep helping you. And that makes people feel good, right? I think there's also this perception that like it's work and like I'm bothering them. It's like people like to help people as long as you make it easy for them. So focus on like how to make it easy. It doesn't have to be a super crazy investment. Just go say hi and ask a good question. If they're there, they're like volunteering their time to do that, then that's like they'll be very happy that you've done that. You'll make their day. And like just stay in touch, right? I think those are the biggest things that matter when it comes to building a network. And most people don't do those things. And I think a lot of it's based on this expectation that it's going to be a bother, which it's not, or that they have to do commit to some crazy amount of time, which it also doesn't have to be.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you for your time today. In closing, I wanted to know if there's a way that someone's watching this and they want to get connected with Handshake or create a profile. What are the next steps for them?
Yeah, so absolutely create a Handshake profile. So if you have a university email, you can create a profile. If you're at Michigan Tech, your profile has been pre-created for you. You can log in with the same account that you used for all the other university services. Um, and then, yeah, happy to kind of along the lines of building a network and networking, like if anybody wants to connect, happy to do that. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. One thing I will say on the networking front is like LinkedIn etiquette is like, if you're going to reach out to somebody you don't know, add a message. I've now made it so actually like people can't connect with me unless they have my email, because I was getting hundreds of people that were just like reaching out with no explanation of why they wanted to connect.
Right,
So I'm happy to connect with you if I don't know you, but just add a message. So
right.
for anyone watching, my email is david@joinhandshake.com. It's pretty easy. So if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, that's probably the best way to do it. Or you can also send me an email, because that's my email. And I'm happy to connect, especially with Michigan Tech people.
Wonderful. All the best with the expansion in Europe and in UK. I'm sure it's going to go really well. It's a different system, but I'm sure
Yeah,
you're learning a lot in the process and making some really great connections.
definitely. Well, thank you. And thanks for the opportunity. And I hope that the virtual conference all goes well.
Well, thank you. And thank you all for joining us for this interview. Be sure to check out all of our interviews with other change makers. Simply go to mtu.edu and enter Global and Community Engagement Conference into the search tab, and you'll find all the other interviews that we've done thus far. Have a great day. Bye.